So my name is Zoe Bell, and I was the Xena stunt double for the last 3 seasons. I was born and raised on an island called Waiheke. That's just a boat ride out of Auckland City, which is in New Zealand. Growing up in Waiheke was fantastic. It was sort of it was a very small population at the time. It took 45 minutes by boat, and there was, you had to keep your feet up because the water would wash in and out, so it kind of kept the masses away, I grew up naked pretty much for the first 7 years of my life. My memories of it are that it was just like eternal summer all the time. Actually, I had to put clothes on to go to school and shoes. But yeah, so Waiheke was great. Little community, it was all family. Fantastic place to grow up. Yeah, I played sports when I was little. I started like recreational gymnastics, like walking along the beam and pointing your toes in a kick kind of deal when I was about 5, I guess. There was not a huge amount of, in my memory, organised sport. Mind you, I was only 6 and 7, what do I know? But because, who are you going to play against, the other 5 kids on the island? Apparently, I was a tomboy. It was one of those things that I look back now and it does make a little bit more sense that maybe that's what I was at the time. But I wasn't about being... I didn't like the idea of being a tomboy. I didn't think I was a tomboy at the time. I just thought skirts were unpractical, and that's pretty much it. Well, when I was training in gymnastics, the last year that I was just training, I ended up with a guy that would come in and train with my coach and I. He was the stunt coordinator of Xena at the time. I kind of knew it, but it didn't really mean anything to me. I didn't really give a shit, so it was just sort of a guy that I was helping to train, And then when I started up Taekwondo, I would stay behind and watch the black belts train because it was far more interesting than watching, my belts train. And it turned out that they were stunt guys. So I started getting an interest in realising that there was stunt work was even possible in New Zealand, And then I saw someone on TV talking about it, and then my dad, who's a GP, general practitioner doctor in New Zealand, had a patient with a bump on his head, and it turned out that he was a stuntman, and that's how he'd got the bump on his head. And I'd obviously been talking about it at home and getting kind of excited about it, so Dad came home with a phone number, He was like, here's some Tylenol, and give me the phone number for the stunt coordinator. My daughter wants to be a stunt woman, And so I basically just rang the guy up under a lot of prodding from my dad. So I finally rang the guy, and I guess I had rang at the right time. They were doing a pilot called Amazon High. Yep, they did that. And so they needed me for 3 weeks as, background action. There was like a couple of extra girls that got brought in as new, and I just sort of... But I was about this big, the whole show. You never see me bigger than that. And I basically just ran around and got knocked over, and... it's a good way to learn, I guess. After Amazon High, I was basically on the books, the agency books, and I worked a couple of days every month or so. And then about 6 months later, the woman who started off being Xena stunt double called Jerry, she's a fucking cool lady, decided she didn't want to play anymore, and she went back to, I think she was pumping petrol and working in an old people's home in a place called Pairoa, which is about as small as it sounds in New Zealand. And I just think that's so cool. She just had enough and didn't want to do it anymore, She came back and did makeup a couple of times and stuff, but... Anyway, everyone was kind of panicked, and the coordinator came up to me on one of the rap parties. I'm 19 and I've just discovered free wine. I'm like, this is excellent. I'd already nicked about 3 of them, and Pete Bell comes up to me and he was like... He basically said to me that, Jerry was leaving, and my exact words were, I know, man, you're f***ed. What are you going to do, And he looked at me and he was like, well, I've been talking with the lads, and we think that we might want to give you a shot. I sobered up pretty quickly after that, and that was it. That's how I became Xena. I was 19 at the time when I got told that I was going to be Xena. Ran home to Mum and Dad. Mum, Dad, I'm going to be Xena, How often do you get to say that? Oh, the first day of work, I was shitting my pants. I was shitting my pants for the first 3 months of work, but it was... I worked 1 day before I actually became under contract. I walked on to see it, and Jerry was having a day on main unit or something, and they put me in the outfit and the wig, and I just felt like a big transvestite, because it's the first time I see myself in a big black wig, and I'm dressed all in leather and stuff, and I basically had to stand there, and they just had a wire attached to my back, and they'd 3, 2, 1, and just pull me, and I just kind of hit the deck and kept rolling. And I was so nervous and so new, I basically did it, and they were like, right, check. They would cut, and then they were resetting. It's like a 25 30-minute reset. And I stood on my spot the whole time. I never moved. I never got a glass of water. Everyone was like, you all right? Do you want something? I was like, no, I'm fine. I just stood there for half an hour until they were ready to shoot again, 3 times in a row. But yeah, I mean, after that, the first day it was scary, dude. I was 19 and all of a sudden, like, it felt to me like the whole show was on my shoulders, you know, which is not exactly true, but... Yeah, well, working with Lucy was sort of it was all so surreal when I first started that I'd never really been around famous people. It didn't occur to me that was necessarily an important thing, but it was sort of I just seen what she looked like. I just knew what she looked like. That's pretty much my only impression, you know. And then when she was on set, she kind of looked like that. She's, you know, gorgeous and looked like a warrior, and she's rocking around on leathers and swords and stuff. But and working with her was great. She just sort of was really kind of supportive of me being new and learning and stuff. There was never once that I felt judged or scared of being around her or anything like that. I mean, I didn't know if I should feel that way or not anyway, but... And, you know, as the years went on... it sounds so old saying that. As the years went on, it just... We became kind of closer and closer. We didn't really even... I don't feel like we really got really close until, you know, right towards the end or even after the series finished, because we were always working... So it was definitely a professional relationship, and we're often on different units, you know. The whole set would be in tune with her a little bit, you know what I mean? It's hard to be the star of a show and not have an effect on the crew, but it was really lighthearted. You know, especially now that I've experienced other sets and all this kind of stuff, it's very apparent to me the effect she had on the running of the crew, and not the running of the crew, I mean, she wasn't whipping any whips or anything, but the kind of the atmosphere and the enjoyment that was shared on set by everybody, you know. So yeah, a lot of the work that we did, particularly I did, is harness work. The girls were often in the harnesses, you know, and that was actually quite a learning experience for me because I'd never been in a harness, and I figured being a gymnast that, you know, flipping's no big deal, you know. The first time I was in a harness, it's a whole different timing. You've got to ride the wires. You can't flip on your own steam because, you know, you've got something pulling you from the hips, and if you flip early, it just unwinds you. But, you know, you learn to do it. It's kind of a timing that becomes natural, and it is one of those... There are times you're in a harness where you really are just kind of like a meat puppet, you know. You just hang at the bottom of a wire, and they pull you, and you go where they pull you. But for the most part, if there's any kind of flipping or twisting or anything like that involved, I mean, it's hard enough to do that stuff under your own steam, but sometimes it's even harder on wires because you have to avoid the wires. You have to make it look like the wires aren't there. And timing's not just me, but it's me and the 6 guys on the other end of the wire that are pulling me. And, you know, so it's sort of and the camera. And so it sort of becomes like a combination of timing. And that stuff does tend to become, like, instinctive, especially when you work with the same group of people for a long time. Fight stuff's kind of the same. Again, I had to adjust the fights. Doing Taekwondo, everything I did was sort of technically crisp and correct, which is not, A, not how Lucy fights necessarily, and B, doesn't work for camera all the time. You know, if I punch straight ahead, and the camera's behind me, you don't see it, you know, so it's sort of I had to adjust all that. But at the same time, and you choreograph a fight, it's not like you're fighting for real, it's not like you're doing patterns, you're working with somebody else. The idea is that you don't hit each other, particularly if you're working with the actors. So again, that's timing, and it's the same thing. It's like you get to the point where you work with the same people so often. I mean, when I first started, it took me all day to learn like a 20-beat fight, and I had to go through it over and over and over and over. And I'm sure that was a little frustrating for the guys that have been doing it for 4 years already, and they would try and get me to make noises when I fight, you know, because it brings energy to it and everything, and I just couldn't do it. I mean, it was just... if someone says to you, make a noise while you fight, what do? You're like, hey-ya, you know, it just was completely unnatural. Well, it was, yeah, and I noticed that the physical mannerisms I would have became... She always stands with one foot up on the ball of her foot. And I don't even remember noticing that she did it, you know, but I just noticed one time that I was doing it, and I was like, that's weird, that's not much of a fight stunt that I have ever learnt before, you know, and then I would watch Lucy fighting, and I was like, oh shit, she does it too, maybe that's, you know, either she copied me or I copied her. Somewhere along the line we both did it, but I think it's probably just, you know, I spent so much time watching, because they would shoot the fights with her, and then they'd shoot the fights with us, so we'd both learn the fights, but there were times that she would change it or they would change it due to whatever, so I always had to watch what they did, and we had to copy, you know, we had to match what they did, so I think you just pick up on stuff like that after a while, you know. It gets hard to drop those habits, though, after 3 years of, you know, getting into them, it's hard to drop them. So the main unit and the second unit was main unit was basically the dialogue unit. It's kind of how we thought of it, you know. I was definitely a second unit dweller, but second unit was usually was the majority of the action, and no, actually main unit was dialogue. It was basically just the leads. All the leads, if they had action or if they had, you know, obviously dialogue, that was all shot out on main unit. And then second unit, we would match all the rest of the action and all the stuff that we didn't need the stars for. And occasionally we'd do dialogue if they ran over, but most of it was background shots and plate shots and all that kind of stuff. But main unit was definitely sort of you know, I started on second unit, and the first day I worked on main unit, I was sort of like, oh, you know, you suddenly become aware that you're where the stars are at, you know, and the big directors and the this and the that. And I mean, I look back at it now, again, in hindsight, it was really relaxed and laid back and stuff, but there was definitely that era of, you know, I wasn't allowed to careen around swearing and laughing and having fun like I did on second unit so much. But second unit was definitely sort of my home, you know, it was where my family, where we kind of formed as, the family that I belonged to was second unit. I mean, you learn on the job, you just sort of, I mean, you're coached, you know, when you do something wrong, someone tells you you're doing it wrong and they tell you how to do it right, and then you fix it. And then after a while it becomes natural to do it a certain way, but it was definitely not I didn't go to stunt school or anything like that. It was kind of, you know, and it came through experience, but also having the guys around, because most of them are really talented martial artists. A lot of them were gymnasts or trampolinists or, you know, racing car drivers or wherever they came from. They all had something to add, and they'd all been there for years before I came along, so they were all sort of really supportive and helpful. I mean, they played practical jokes on me all the time when I first got there, but most of the time they were pretty nice about it. My first car hit was, this was pre-Xena, so I'd only been doing it for a couple of months, and I'd never worked with cars like that before, but it was Short Street. It was a New Zealand soap, and I guess one of the characters had to be hit by the car, and I was the best match for it, and so we went along, and the guys that were there had done this stuff before and were really supportive and good, and I had pads on and a wig and stuff like that, but and we started off slow. We started off at like 10 kilometres and then 20 kilometres. I can't even remember what the full speed was, but just standing there watching watching the front of a car get closer and closer and not moving was weird, you know, sort of like your whole life you're taught to get out of the way of moving objects, particularly ones that are bigger than you. And the only advice, I mean, the main advice I got was, you know, don't get out of the way, just lift your feet so you don't go under. I'm like, okay, right. So the Scene of the Clones episode, we had a big junkyard fight, and it was me and Elty, Xena versus Elty, and one of the things I had to do was get hit by a car. Elty's chasing me around the junkyard in the car. And they had, oh shit, I'm not going to remember what kind of car it was now. It's like a Thunderbird or something, and there's like one of them in New Zealand. And so we did a bunch of slow rehearsals with Matt over the windscreen and stuff like that. And in this one, I was meant to roll up the windscreen onto the roof. And there's a camera on the inside, so I rolled past the camera. And the first time we did it full speed, you know, I had as many pads as I could possibly fit under the leather dress that I was wearing. And I hit it at a funny angle, and I rolled straight into the windscreen and just caved the whole windscreen. I didn't manage to get up and past it. And I rolled back off again, and I remember the first thing I thought was like, oh shit, I've screwed the one and only car they have, you know, like the hero car. And I got off and I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I screwed your car. And they're all like, forget the car, you know, are you all right? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, wait, hang on, let me check, you know. And I had glass in my leg and stuff like that. I was bleeding, and it was sort of it wasn't that painful, I think, well, until the adrenaline wore off, and then I guess it started to hurt a little bit. But, you know, and at that point I started to realize, like, there's times when, screw the car, they can get a new windscreen for it, you know what I mean? And it's good to be aware of that stuff, but, you know, if I'm out, then they're more screwed than having to replace a windscreen, so. So there's one episode, I can't remember what it's called, but I had to flip off a balcony 2 stories down to the ground, you know, and carry on into a fight. And it was one of those rigs that was rigged in a way, I remember thinking it seemed a little difficult. I didn't quite figure out, in my head, the physics of it didn't make that much sense, you know, it was sort of I had to travel a long way before I started to flip, and it was done with a ratchet, which is like an air ram, which is sort of it's a hydraulic, it's a machine basically powering you through the air instead of human force. And they'd locked it off so that I wouldn't hit the ground, so I was meant to land about 4 feet upright, 4 feet from the ground. But, you know, and Pete Bell, the coordinator at the time, was like, you sure you want to do this? We can just make it a jump. And I was like, no, I'll give it a go. You know, I'll try it. And because I, you know, still had that I'm invincible kind of thing going on. And I tried it, and I didn't fully rotate, and so I was coming down back to the ground, and I couldn't make it over. And yeah, so I hit the end of my pick points and folded around my harness and kicked myself in the back of the head. So I, you know, essentially kind of crabbed around, you know, folded back the wrong way. Anyway, I just kind of swung upright, and I was kind of dazed. I was shocked because I you know, when your body does certain things, you know it's not meant to do that. I sort of, and everyone else panicked. Everyone that saw it, I guess it looked pretty horrific, you know. And the medic came up to me and he was like, "You all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think so. I don't think that was good, but I think I'm all right, you know." And he's like, "Well, just let her down slowly, blah, blah." Everyone step back, and, you know, I was a little bit freaked out at how seriously he was taking it, you know. I was like, "I'm fine, don't worry about it." And then as I was let down, my feet kind of hit the ground, but I almost felt like I couldn't feel them. They just sort of buckled underneath me, you know. And I was like, shit, you know. And the first thing went through my head is, shit, what if I can't work again? And then the second thing I thought was, what if I can't walk again, you know? The medic was like, "Can you stand up?" And I'm like, "I'll try," you know? And I stood up, and as soon as I stood up, I was like, "Yeah, I can walk, that's fine, let's do it again," you know? And the medic was like, "Zoe, sit down, shut up, I'm getting an ice pack." And I was like, no, I'm fine, it doesn't even hurt, you know? He's like, "It's because you're in shock, you know, of course it doesn't hurt." I was like, and then I was like, okay, no, you're probably right. And in my head, I was thinking, my mum and dad are going to be pissed. If I tell them the story and I get up and do it again, I know they're going to be pissed at me. So I let them ice pack me. And, you know, after a while, I started to realize that it was quite sore. And turns out, much later on, I think what happened is one of the vertebrae, as I bent like that, cracked one of the vertebrae. I didn't officially break my back, but it was definitely not a good injury to have. And Paul basically sent me, Paul Grinder, the second unit director, was like, "Go home." And I was like, "No, I'll be fine in a couple of hours, you know." And he said, "No, go home and don't come back. I don't want to see you until you're good." So I was gone for about 3 days. I came back, I'm like, "I'm fine." And of course I walked straight into a fight where they had to break a chair over my back. And so I put a back pad in, and they hit me over the back, and I just crumbled. I was like, "Okay, no, you're right, I can't keep going." He was like, "Don't come back till after the holidays." But that was definitely a kind of a wake-up call, sort of. If I come in injured, it's all good and well being tough, but if I come in injured and I can't do the work, then I'm screwing everybody, I'm screwing the whole production up, as opposed to just going, "No, replace me." Well, you know, because there was often a second Xena double, so if I was on one unit, whoever it was at the time, Kate or Carmel or whatever, would swap out. So, you know, it's also an ego thing. It's like, oh, no one can take my place. It's like, bullshit. If you can't do the work, there's someone who can do it for you, you know. Rest up and then come back when you're good. Fallen Angel was, there was parts of it that were great fun. You know, we got to do some stuff in wires where we had to try and make it look like we were flying, and so it's much more fluid than just your normal sort of run up a tree and kick a guy in the head or, you know, whatever it is. But there was also, like when I was an angel, it was great. I had on this big flowing dress, and it was pretty comfortable, these big white wings and just normal hair and makeup, and it was pretty good. But Xena, you know, jumps into hell. I love that. She jumps into hell to save Gabrielle, who fell into hell, and becomes a demon. So Xena becomes a demon, and so I'm wearing a flying harness, which is like a stunt harness, and I'm also wearing a wing harness. There's this big chest harness that has 9-foot wings. I can't remember how much they weighed now. I knew at the time because I asked somebody. They were heavy, you know. And I also had on a full prosthetics face and a big wig and horns and high heels that were meant to look as hooves, and very short sort of wire type thing as a skirt. And I just remember being so uncomfortable. Like, it wasn't even pain, it was just immense discomfort. I couldn't, you know, I couldn't get in and out of harness because it was attached into the costume. So I was in a harness for, like 12 hours straight, which is not, I managed devised a way of being able to loosen it and tighten it, but I couldn't take it off. And the chest harness was as tight as it could possibly go to stop the wings tipping back that way. So I was constantly breathing like, you know, which is problematic in itself. And then when you're hanging in the harness, you've got all your weight sitting, you know, across your thighs, plus all the weight of the wings. Plus when you tip, you've got to use all your back muscles to stop yourself from tipping. I mean, it was just hard work, and I was in it for, I can't remember how long it was. I felt the whole episode, I think we shot for 3 weeks or something crazy like that. That's my memory. I mean, I could be completely off, but there was one time I was hanging up in the harness, and we basically just against blue screen doing, you know, like a sword fight meant to be in the air. And of course it's blue screen, so there's shitloads of lights on you, so it was hot, you know, really hot in a studio. And I'd done this fight a couple of times with this girl, Tammy, that was doubling Renee at the time. And we were waiting in between takes, and I started to feel a bit lightheaded and weird, you know, and Tammy was like, "You all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I think it's just that because the costume would sit right into my neck too, so I thought it was just cutting off circulation or something." So I pulled it out. I was like, "No, I'm fine." She's like, "You sure?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be right." And I kind of adjusted, and then I was sitting there, and then the next thing I knew was that kind of feeling of oil coming into your eyes, and I guess I just passed out in the harness. And one of the guys on the crew was like, "It was just like in the movies. Your sword dropped and it was kind of slow-mo and you just slumped." I'm like, "Dude, that's not that cool," you know? But they just dropped me to the ground and had like 50 people trying to get all the harnesses and stuff off me. And Paul Grinder turned up with some chocolate and some oranges and some milk and was like, "Here, this will fix you." And I was like, "Sweet." But it's the same thing. I kind of came right. It took about half an hour for me to feel normal again. But then but Paul was like, "Go home." And I was like, No, I can stay and do it." And, you know, that time he was kind of pissed at me. He was like, "Just shut up and go home," you know? And I was like, "All right, fine. You're right," you know? Well, yeah, so on Xena, I guess the majority of my work was obviously harness work or fight work. But I would also, you know, if Xena gets set on fire, I would get set on fire. If Xena falls off her flying horse, which she did, I would learn to high fall. And if she gets hit by a car, I get hit by a car. If she nearly drowns, I do underwater stuff. And so there was, you know, I mean, it was really special for me to be able to get that much day-to-day experience. And but also the variety of stuff that I got to try, you know, was pretty kind of unique compared to what most people's stunt careers are like, I think. A really good fight with a bunch of cool harness stuff in it is always good because I get to work closely with the people that I, you know, really dig and respect and enjoy working with. But it's sort of yeah, that's hard. I mean, there were some days, I know what I didn't like, when you would just consistently just eat it, you know, if you're just getting slammed into walls or slammed into the ground or whatever, you know, it's sort of, I mean, it's all part and parcel of the job, so it's not like I was whinging about it, but it's definitely not the most enjoyable part of what I do. High work I really like. High work is something that I didn't get that much experience with on Xena in terms of high work. I mean, the highest we went was, you know, the height of a castle, because kind of as high as anything went in Xena, except for the flying horse thing, that was a little bit higher. But, and I enjoy it. I'm comfortable with heights and speeds. I'm comfortable with, so I get to enjoy it because it's not scaring me the whole time. But right, so I'm on Xena, on set, second unit, and we're in the middle of shooting some fight, and I've got downtime, and one of the ADs comes onto set and says, "Zoe, it's the phone for you, you know, like the set phone." No one's ever called me on the set phone, ever, in my whole time on set, you know. I had my own phone, you know. And I was like, "Who's calling me?" And she said, some American director. And I was like, "Oh, excuse me, guys. Sorry, I gotta go. Some director from America's calling me." You know, I was like totally hamming it all up. I had no idea who it was. I thought someone was playing a prank on me. But it turned out it was Amanda McKaylee for the documentary Double Dare. And to be honest, my first reaction to doing the documentary was, don't think I'm what you want. I had one experience doing press stuff before for a magazine called New Zealand Fitness. And as the title says, it's about, you know, fitness. And at the time, I was certainly not a very good example of fit in terms of what you need to be fit. You know, I was 19 and there's free alcohol everywhere, and I used to eat McDonald's all the time, and I was smoking and drinking, and I just really was not. So anyway, I sat down and chatted to this woman for an hour or whatever, and I read the article afterwards, and she'd snipped everything I'd said to fit, you know, the fact it was New Zealand Fit. And I wasn't offended, it just was hilarious. I mean, I had friends ringing me and going, "Duh, what a load of horse shit, you're so lying." I'm like, "I didn't lie," you know. But so when I found out about the documentary, I was like, "No, look, you can snip my words apart, but if you've got a camera on me, you can't fake it, and I'm not going to lie to you, you know." So I was like, "No, I'm not interested." But then I got the phone call from Amanda and got on the phone, and she said something, and she said shit, and I was like, okay, that's a good start. You know, I'm like, okay, I can relax a little bit. And she was talking about it, and the more I talked with her about it, the more I realized it was not about me fitting into the stereotypical stunt woman or what they wanted me to be or anything. It was just like, we just want to shoot you the way that you are and hope it works out. And I was like, okay, it's your risk. I don't have a problem with that, you know. And so I was sort of, and the next thing I thought was, my mum and dad are going to love it. And if I ever have kids, how cool would it be for them to see it? You know, that was sort of my thinking. So Xena wrapped. Right before Xena wrapped, I found out that the Xena convention, like the Xena fan club, wanted me to go to the Xena convention in Pasadena, Los Angeles. which didn't really mean that much to me at the time, except for it was in LA, I was like, righto, cool. I didn't even know they had Xena conventions. But so a couple of weeks after Xena finished, I went to America and went to the Xena convention, and that's when I met up with Jeannie and a couple other people. I ended up going to Stunt Awards and met a couple of Canadian stunt coordinators just at a party or whatever, and went to the Xena convention, which was an interesting experience. It was pretty cool. It wasn't, the Xena convention was pretty intense, I think just going there as a spectator would have been, an experience, but to go there and be put up on stage, it was me and Paul Grinder got up, and I walked out with a Xena wig on. I was just pissing around, I walked out with a Xena wig on because they introduced me as the Xena stunt, and then I took it off and people booed. People were really bummed that I was blonde at the time, I was like, sorry, but it was amazing. There's just this sea of people that apparently think I'm the shit. I've had because the following in America is so much stronger than the following in New Zealand too, that I, really had no comprehension of it. But it was, it was mind-boggling experience. So yeah, that happened. I went home for a year, was kind of in stalemate for a year, and then decided, right, screw it, I'm going to go to Canada and use the contacts that I met through Jeannie in Canada to blah, blah. I stopped in America to hang out with Jeannie again for 2 weeks on my way to Canada. And in that 2 weeks, in the very Hollywood way where someone I knew someone who was shagging someone who knew someone who knew someone who knew someone, I ended up landing an audition for Kill Bill, And to be honest, it didn't strike me as being that big a deal. I knew it was a big deal. I knew it was Quentin Tarantino. I wasn't affected by it in the way I thought I would have been, or the way I would have been if it was in New Zealand, because it just all seemed a little bit surreal, I'm in Hollywood, and I'm on my way to Canada, and it's Quentin, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, For this, I was like, sweet, this sounds like fun, I can go home. My whole thing was I'll do the audition, and then what I get out of it is being able to go home and tell my mates at home that I auditioned for a Quentin Tarantino movie. And, and Jeannie came with me, and she kind of talked me through, she sorted me out with getting a headshot and all that kind of crap, and lying about my weight and, all this kind of stuff. And she came with me to the audition, and she talked to me about it afterwards, and she was like, how do you think it went? And I was like, it didn't go that well, because I fell over a bunch of times, because I'd worn my legs out earlier in the morning training. But I said to her, I walked out feeling great. I didn't think I had the job, but I walked out like, shit, I looked at how this all went and other people coming in and out, and this is possible for me. I walked out of it going, I get it. This is a reality, So later that night, I think it was a day later or something like that. I'm at Jeannie's and I get a phone call saying, oh, was it that night? Whatever. Very soon afterwards, I get a phone call saying, what's your schedule like? Do you think you can come to China? I've been unemployed for a year. I'm like, yeah, I think I could sort that one out for you. But I was, over the moon. And the guy said, Quentin liked how tough you were. And I was like, that's why she knows. That's why she's been in the business for that many years. And so I, rang Mum and Dad. I'm like, that Canada trip, it's scrapped. I'm going to China, And that was a buzz too, that one. That was a big deal. Then it became then I suddenly realized, then I was like, I'm going, Uma Thurman and Quentin Tarantino and Beijing, I'd never been to China before. It was like, shit, man. I didn't become a stunt woman to be in the limelight, I didn't really think about why I became a stunt woman, but it certainly wasn't because of that. And, as far as how it feels for me doing it, it's fun. I don't feel like I'm definitely getting exposure and stuff, but it doesn't feel like it's because I'm famous. It's just it's almost like I'm a fad or something like that, and it's fun, but it's fun because, my parents love it and my friends think it's hilarious, and I talk to people at home about it and they all write back like, you big goof, what are you, blah, blah. So it's hard for me to let it go to my head. Even if I wanted to, I don't think I could. I'm sure I could if I tried hard enough, but I honestly don't know what it is that keeps me going. It's there are times when I don't feel like I'm keeping on going. I guess you do keep existing, but there are times that I'm bummed, and it's not like I go, just think of your dream, and it switches me out of it, like maybe in the movies, but I don't know. There is something that I've had my whole life. I don't know if it's like my parents instilled it in me or if it's some random gene that I was born with, but there is in me, there's always like this sense of I'm going to be okay. It doesn't mean like I'm going to be famous or I'm going to be rich or like that kind of successful, but I do have a deep-seated kind of, I will be okay. When it all comes out in the wash, I'm always going to be okay, which maybe that's not true, but it feels good to have it there, you know.